Michael had always admired Rachel's dedication to philanthropy, or at least, that's what he thought it was. His wife had built an image around herself, one of compassion and selflessness, always championing causes that supported underprivileged children or environmental conservation. It was part of what made her so likable, so trustworthy. So when she excitedly told him about a weekend-long charity event, he didn't think much of it. "It's going to be huge," Rachel gushed over dinner, her emerald eyes sparkling under the chandelier's glow. "Derek is putting together a fundraiser, and I'll be hosting one of the main events. We'll have auctions, donor meetups, and even a panel on social impact. I won't have a second to breathe." Derek. Michael's fork paused mid-air. He had met Derek twice, once at a gala and another time when Rachel invited him to dinner, casually introducing him as a friend of the cause. He was a man of power, the kind who wore wealth like a second skin, with a quiet arrogance that Michael couldn't quite place. He shook off the thought and smiled. "Sounds like a busy weekend. You sure you'll have time to eat?" Rachel laughed. "Oh, please. I'll probably live off champagne and hors d'oeuvres, but I'll be posting updates so you can see how it's all going." That was the first thing that struck him as odd. Rachel wasn't usually the type to flood social media with updates about her work. She preferred polished, after-the-fact posts. Yet, within hours of her departure that Friday evening, her Instagram stories were buzzing. Michael scrolled through them while sitting alone in their living room, half watching a documentary he'd been meaning to see. The first post showed Rachel in a crisp white dress, smiling beside a group of volunteers, kicking off a weekend of giving back, charity for all, the caption read. The next was a picture of an auction hall, round tables with elegant centerpieces, a dimly lit stage, ready to raise some serious funds tonight. Then a short video of her holding a glass of champagne, speaking excitedly to the camera about how impactful the night had already been. It was all perfectly curated, but something wasn't right. Michael squinted at the background in one of the photos. The hotel ballroom she was supposedly at had chandeliers that didn't match the ones from the event venue she had mentioned. Curious, he did a quick search for the charity's official event page. Scrolling through the photos they'd shared, the decor in their pictures was completely different. A chill settled in his gut. Maybe he was overthinking. Maybe she was at another part of the event. Maybe. Michael clicked on one of Rachel's older posts and downloaded the image. Then he ran a reverse image search. His breath hitched when he saw the results. The photo wasn't from tonight. It wasn't even from this year. It was from a fundraiser held 2 years ago in a completely different state. Rachel had lied. Michael's mind raced. Why would she fake a post? Where was she really? His fingers trembled as he opened the Find My iPhone app. They had shared locations for years, mostly for safety reasons. It had always been a simple, unquestioned thing between them. A map loaded on the screen, pinpointing her exact location. Rachel was nowhere near the charity event. She was hours away, at a remote villa near the coast. Michael stared at the screen, his stomach twisting into a knot. He had ignored the little inconsistencies for too long. He had trusted too easily. Not anymore. This wasn't just a hunch, it was real, and he needed to see it with his own eyes. Grabbing his keys, Michael headed for the door. He was going to find out exactly what Rachel was hiding. Michael gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white as he sped down the highway, the glow of his phone screen illuminating the passenger seat where Rachel's location flickered on the map. His mind was a hurricane of thoughts, each more damning than the last. He wanted to be wrong. Maybe she had a reason for lying, some innocent explanation, a surprise she was planning. But deep down he knew the truth had already taken root, poisoning everything. The road stretched ahead, empty save for the occasional pair of headlights flashing by. The villa she was at was nowhere near the city, tucked along the coastline, a place where people disappeared from the world for a while. It was the kind of place that promised privacy, indulgence, secrets kept behind tall gates. Michael clenched his jaw, his pulse drumming in his ears. He could already see it. Rachel laughing, her hand grazing Derek's arm, the way her head tilted when she flirted, the look she used to give him before things changed. His mind replayed every moment that had led to this night. Rachel had become distant over the past year, her excuses piling up like bricks in a wall between them. Charity work, late meetings, business trips that felt unnecessary. the subtle way she turned away when he reached for her in bed. At first, he had convinced himself it was stress. He had asked if she was okay, if she needed space, if there was something he could do. She had smiled, touched his cheek, said she loved him, that things were just busy, but love didn't feel like this. Love didn't make you check your wife's location in the dead of night, heart hammering, knowing you were about to uncover something you could never unsee. The villa loomed ahead, its entrance marked by an ornate wrought-iron gate. Michael pulled to the side of the road before he reached it, killing his headlights, swallowing hard as he took in the massive property beyond the gates. Warm lights glowed from within, casting shadows on the terrace, music faint but unmistakable drifting through the night air. He inhaled sharply, forcing himself to focus, to be methodical. He wasn't going to storm in blind. He needed to see first, to know exactly what he was dealing with. He got out of the car, moving carefully through the darkness, keeping to the trees lining the property. The night air was thick with the scent of salt and jasmine, the distant sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below. He reached the side of the villa, crouching low beneath the balcony, his fingers gripping the rough stone wall as he listened. Laughter, clinking glasses, the unmistakable murmur of Rachel's voice. Michael's breath came slow and controlled, but inside everything was unraveling. He peered through the open French doors leading into the villa's living area, his pulse stuttering at the sight before him. Rachel reclined on a white leather sofa, barefoot, her dress draped loosely over her legs as she leaned toward Derek, wineglass in hand, her expression soft, amused, too intimate. Derek sat beside her, his arm resting along the back of the couch, dangerously close, his Rolex catching the light as he gestured, saying something that made Rachel laugh, her fingers lightly touching his knee. Michael's vision narrowed. Every instinct screamed at him to charge in, to demand an explanation, to make her look him in the eye and confess. But he stayed still, forcing himself to watch, to let the weight of the betrayal sink in completely. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. It wasn't just a moment of weakness. This was practiced, familiar, the kind of ease that only came with repetition. This wasn't the first time. Rachel turned slightly, her face illuminated by the glow of the chandelier above. Her phone was on the table beside her, screen lighting up with a notification. Another carefully crafted social media post about her charity weekend. Michael nearly laughed at the irony, at the audacity of it. While the world saw a devoted woman giving back, she was here, wrapped in luxury, her so-called philanthropy nothing more than a cover. Derek poured more wine, his voice low, coaxing. Rachel sighed, setting her glass down, tilting her head as she spoke, her lips forming words Michael couldn't hear, but already knew. It was in her posture, in the way she smiled, in the way she leaned into Derek as though he belonged to her. Something inside Michael snapped. He straightened, stepping forward, his shadow stretching into the room before his voice cut through the soft hum of conversation. "Hell of a charity event." Rachel froze. Derek's gaze snapped to Michael, his body tensing. But Rachel was slower, her expression shifting from confusion to shock, to something eerily close to fear. "Michael?" Michael stepped through the doorway, the anger in his chest coiling tighter with every heartbeat. "Don't stop on my account." He let his gaze flick to Derek, who had the nerve to look annoyed rather than guilty. "I wouldn't want to interrupt such generous giving." Rachel scrambled to her feet, her hands instinctively smoothing down her dress as though she could fix this with appearances alone. "Michael, save it," he cut in, voice flat, sharp. "I've been watching for the past 10 minutes. I think I've got the gist." Derek exhaled slowly, setting his glass down with deliberate care. "Michael, I don't think—" "Shut up!" Michael turned his full attention to his wife, the woman he had loved, trusted, fought for, the woman who had just destroyed every ounce of that trust. "How long?" Rachel swallowed hard. "Michael, please, how long?" The words were ice, each one a demand, not a request. Rachel's eyes darted to Derek before back to Michael, guilt flashing across her face. "It's not what you think," Michael laughed, the sound bitter, hollow. "That's rich. You really expect me to believe that?" He shook his head, stepping back as if she were something he needed to distance himself from. I checked your posts, the photos, the location. You didn't even try to be careful, Rachel." Her breath hitched, her carefully constructed mask cracking. "Michael, I never meant for me to find out?" He let out another humorless laugh. "I figure." Derek finally stood, adjusting his sleeves as if this were a mere business meeting gone south. "Michael, let's be adults about this." Michael's gaze snapped to him, burning. "Adults? You're lecturing me about being an adult while screwing my wife behind my back?" He took a step closer, his voice dropping to something lethal. "Tell me, Derek, does that make you feel powerful? Taking what isn't yours?" Derek hesitated, his usual confidence flickering. Michael turned back to Rachel, exhaustion hitting him like a wave. "I came here hoping I was wrong," he admitted, voice quieter now. "I wanted there to be some explanation, any explanation, that didn't lead to this." His hands curled into fists before he exhaled, letting go. "But I see it now. You didn't just betray me, Rachel. You made me a fool." Rachel's lips parted, but there was nothing left to say. Michael shook his head, stepping toward the door. "Enjoy your charity work," and with that, he walked away, leaving her standing in the ruins of her carefully constructed lie. Michael didn't remember the drive back. The road blurred under the glow of streetlights, his mind a storm of thoughts, memories, and anger. The image of Rachel sitting there with Derek, so comfortable, so at ease, replayed in his head like a scene from a nightmare. The weight of betrayal pressed down on him, heavier with each passing second. She had looked startled, but not guilty, not like someone who had made a mistake. She had looked like someone who had been caught, someone who had gotten too comfortable in the deception and had finally run out of luck. The rage in Michael's chest burned hotter as he pulled into their driveway, their home, the one he had built with her, the one they had spent years filling with love, laughter, shared memories. Now it felt tainted, like every moment they had spent here was a lie, rewritten by the truth of what he had seen tonight. He slammed the car door shut, taking a slow breath, steadying himself. He wasn't going to explode, not yet. Rachel would be home soon, and when she walked through that door, she was going to face the truth, face the man she had lied to, the man she had made a fool of. Michael stepped inside, the house eerily silent. His fingers flexed at his sides as he moved through the space. Everything exactly as she had left it, her shoes neatly lined by the door, a scarf draped over the back of the couch, the scent of her perfume still faint in the air. It made his stomach turn. He walked to the kitchen, poured himself a drink, and sat at the dining table facing the front door. The waiting was the hardest part. The minutes dragged, stretching into an hour, then 2. He checked his phone. She was still at the villa. Typical. He had expected her to rush home, to try and explain herself, to beg for forgiveness, or at least attempt to spin some elaborate excuse. But she hadn't. She was still with him. That told him everything he needed to know. By the time her car finally pulled into the driveway, Michael had cycled through every possible scenario. He had pictured her walking in, pretending nothing had happened. He had imagined her launching into an excuse, some pathetic attempt to manipulate him into believing her lies. He had even imagined her breaking down, confessing, trying to salvage whatever was left of their marriage. But as the door swung open, Rachel walked in with none of those things. She wasn't crying. She wasn't defensive. She wasn't even ashamed. She just froze when she saw him sitting there, her hand still on the doorknob. "Michael," she said, her voice careful, measured. He took a slow sip of his drink before setting the glass down. "Have fun?" Rachel swallowed, closing the door behind her, her movements slow, deliberate. "It's late," she said, as if that mattered, as if it changed anything. "Can we talk in the morning?" Michael exhaled sharply through his nose, a humorless chuckle escaping before he could stop it. "That's rich," he said, shaking his head. "You want to sleep on this? Take a few hours to come up with a better story?" Rachel's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you think you saw." "I saw enough," he cut her off before she could even start. "I saw you sitting there with him like you belonged to him. I saw the way you looked at him, the way you touched him." His voice was steady, but inside, his rage simmered dangerously close to the surface. "And I saw you lie." Rachel sighed, rubbing her temples, like he was the one being unreasonable. "Michael, please. It's not what it looks like." His chair scraped against the floor as he stood abruptly, his height towering over her. "Then what is it, Rachel?" He took a step closer, forcing her to meet his eyes. Because from where I was standing, it looked like my wife of 10 years was in another man's arms, drinking expensive wine at a villa she told me didn't exist. She flinched, but quickly masked it, her lips pressing into a thin line. It's complicated. No, Michael snapped, his patience snapping with it. It's actually pretty simple. You lied. You betrayed me. You made me believe you were off saving the world while you were screwing Derek in some beachfront mansion. His voice dropped lower, colder. So tell me, Rachel, what part of that is complicated? Her face twisted, and for a second he saw something close to remorse flicker in her eyes, but it was gone just as quickly. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said finally, her voice quieter now. Michael clenched his jaw. How long? She hesitated. That was all the answer he needed. He let out a bitter laugh, stepping back. Wow! He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. I don't even know why I'm surprised. Rachel shook her head, her expression hardening. Michael, Stop. His voice was firm, unyielding. Don't insult me with excuses. Don't stand there and act like this was some accident, some mistake you just happened to fall into. He gestured toward the door. You had a choice, Rachel. And you made it. She folded her arms, defensive now. And what about you, Michael? You think our marriage has been perfect? You think I haven't noticed how distant you've been, how we barely talk anymore? Michael scoffed. So now it's my fault? He shook his head, disbelief laced in his tone. You want to rewrite history? Make yourself the victim in this? Rachel crossed her arms, her chin lifting slightly. I'm saying it wasn't working, and you didn't even see it? Michael felt something inside him break, something deep, something final. He stared at the woman in front of him, the woman he had loved, the woman he had fought for, and he didn't recognize her. Michael, he said, you know what, Rachel? His voice was eerily calm now, the storm inside him settling into something clearer, sharper. You're right. I didn't see it. He nodded slowly, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. I didn't see how selfish you'd become. I didn't see how you were using your good deeds to cover up your betrayal. His lips curled into a humorless smirk, and I definitely didn't see that I was married to someone who was so good at faking everything. Rachel's expression wavered just for a second. Michael, he turned away, exhaling through his nose. I'll have the divorce papers drawn up by morning. Silence. When he looked back, Rachel's face had paled. You're serious? Michael nodded. I'm done. For the first time, panic flickered across her face. Michael, we don't have to do this tonight. Yes, we do, he said, his voice unwavering. Because I've spent too much time pretending that this marriage was something it wasn't. But now I see it for what it is. He reached for his keys, his decision already made. And I refuse to be a fool any longer. He didn't wait for her response. He didn't need to. As he walked out the door, the weight he had been carrying for months, maybe even years, lifted from his shoulders. Rachel had made her choice. Now he was making his. Rachel stood frozen in the middle of the living room, her face pale, her lips slightly parted as if she had more to say, but Michael wasn't interested in listening anymore. He had given her the chance to explain, to admit the truth, to own her betrayal. Instead, she had chosen deflection, excuses, and half-truths that only insulted his intelligence. He didn't slam the door when he left. That would have been too dramatic, too emotional. Instead, he shut it quietly, decisively, like closing the final chapter of a book he never wanted to read again. The night air was cold against his skin as he walked to his car, but it felt oddly refreshing. For the first time in months, maybe even years, he felt clear-headed. The weight of suspicion, doubt, and betrayal had been suffocating him for too long, but now it was gone. The truth had ripped through the illusion, leaving nothing but clarity in its wake. Michael sat behind the wheel, gripping it for a moment before starting the engine. He had nowhere to go, not really. He could check into a hotel, crash at a friend's place, drive around until exhaustion took over, but none of that mattered right now. He just needed to be anywhere but here. As he pulled out of the driveway, he glanced once at the house they had built together, filled with memories that now felt hollow. Rachel still stood by the window, watching him go. He looked away before he could feel anything close to regret. Michael checked into a hotel downtown, a sterile, impersonal room that smelled faintly of bleach and fabric softener. He didn't bother turning on the TV or unpacking his overnight bag. Instead, he sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He had always imagined betrayal would feel like rage, like fire burning through his veins. But now that it had happened, now that the evidence was undeniable, all he felt was exhaustion, a deep, bone-weary kind of tiredness that no amount of sleep could fix. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. He didn't have to check to know it was Rachel. She had already called 3 times in the past half hour. He ignored it again. Let her sit with her own guilt. Let her wonder what he was thinking, what he was planning. Instead, he opened a group chat with a handful of mutual friends, the ones who had always believed Rachel was a saint, the ones who praised her charitable work and looked up to her as a role model. Michael took a slow breath before typing. Just a heads up, if you see Rachel posting about her big charity weekend, you might want to ask her how much of it was actually about giving back and how much was spent in a private villa with Derek. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. The first response came within seconds. What? Then another. Are you serious, Rachel? Michael leaned back against the headboard, watching the messages roll in. Word would spread fast. He wasn't out for revenge. Not exactly. But if Rachel wanted to build her reputation on a lie, he wasn't going to stand by and let her. Rachel must have known what was coming because by morning she had switched from calling him to sending long, frantic texts. Michael, please, don't do this. We need to talk. I know you're hurt, but airing our private issues like this isn't fair. I made a mistake. But that doesn't erase everything we've built together. Michael read them all, then deleted them without responding. By the time he checked his social media, the fallout had already begun. The carefully curated image Rachel had built, philanthropic, selfless, admired, was crumbling. People had started asking questions in the comment sections of her latest posts. Some were polite, confused. Others were brutal. So, were the donations going to charity or to a beachfront getaway? You preach about honesty and integrity, and this is what you do behind closed doors? Wow, all those years of acting like you were better than everyone else. Guess you're just like the rest. Rachel had disabled the comments within the hour. Michael wasn't surprised when his phone rang again. This time he answered. Michael! Rachel's voice came through the line, tight with barely contained panic. You need to stop this. He let out a slow exhale. Stop what, Rachel? Telling the truth? This isn't just about us, she snapped. My reputation, my work. Don't give me that, Michael cut in, his voice sharper than before. This isn't about charity. It's about your ego. You lied, you got caught, and now you don't like the consequences. She was quiet for a beat, then softer, more controlled. Can we at least talk in person? He considered it. Then he thought about last night, about the way she had looked at Derek, the way she had tried to twist the blame back onto him. No, he said simply. Rachel inhaled sharply, clearly not expecting that answer. Michael, please. He ended the call. Michael met with a lawyer that afternoon. The paperwork was drawn up within the week. Rachel didn't try to fight him on the divorce. Maybe she knew she had no ground to stand on. Maybe Derek had promised her a new life, one without the weight of a husband who had seen through her lies. Either way, she signed. By the end of the month, Michael was officially free. Derek, as it turned out, wasn't as invested in Rachel as she had assumed. The scandals surrounding their affair had tainted his public image. His business partners distanced themselves, donors hesitated, and the whispers of his involvement in Rachel's deception grew louder. By the time summer rolled around, he was seen with a younger woman, some rising socialite with a name that glittered in the press. Rachel, on the other hand, had faded from the public eye. Michael didn't keep tabs on her, but he heard things. People talked. She's struggling, a mutual friend mentioned one evening over drinks. Guess she underestimated how much of her success was built on perception. No one wants to associate with her now. Michael just nodded, sipping his drink. He felt nothing. No satisfaction, no lingering bitterness. Just distance. One night, months later, Michael found himself walking along the coast. The same stretch of beach not far from the villa where everything had unraveled. The sky was a deep, endless blue, the waves steady, rhythmic. He felt lighter now. The anger had faded, the betrayal no longer something that consumed him. Rachel had made her choices. and he had made his. He had walked away, and now he was finally moving forward. Michael never looked back. The divorce papers were signed, the settlement was handled swiftly, and whatever lingering traces of Rachel still clung to his life were methodically erased. Her belongings were boxed and sent away, her name removed from bank accounts and legal documents, her presence fading into nothing more than a closed chapter. He hadn't spoken to her since the day she called begging him to stop the truth from spreading. That had been months ago, and her silence since then had been a relief. People whispered about the fallout, but Michael didn't care. He moved through life with a quiet steadiness, refusing to let bitterness take root. Rachel's carefully cultivated public image had shattered beyond repair. Her social circles had distanced themselves, donors withdrew, and the organizations she once championed were quick to remove her name from any affiliations. Derek, predictably, had moved on. Michael wasn't sure whether Rachel had truly believed Derek would stand by her, but if she had, she was sorely mistaken. The businessman had no interest in baggage, and the moment her name became synonymous with scandal, he disappeared like smoke in the wind. Rachel tried to salvage what she could, issuing vague public statements about misunderstandings and deeply regretting any pain caused. But the damage was irreversible. Her credibility was gone, her influence dwindling with every passing day. Michael imagined she spent her time trying to build something new, but he never bothered to check. She was no longer his problem. He settled into a new rhythm. Work became his sanctuary. The predictability of numbers and financial reports a welcome contrast to the chaos he had endured. He moved into a sleek apartment overlooking the city, smaller than the house he had shared with Rachel but infinitely more peaceful. The quiet was comforting, no longer a reminder of absence, but rather an affirmation of solitude by choice. He went to the gym more often, took spontaneous weekend trips, reconnected with friends he had neglected over the years. Slowly, piece by piece, he was rebuilding. One evening, as he sat at a rooftop bar nursing a whiskey, an old friend slid into the seat beside him. Mark had been a groomsman at his wedding, had seen firsthand the cracks in Michael's marriage before he had been willing to admit they existed. "You seem different," Mark observed, taking a sip of his beer. Michael smirked. "That a bad thing?" "No." Mark tilted his head, studying him. "It's like you're breathing again." Michael exhaled, letting the words settle. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "I guess I am." There was no longer a weight pressing on his chest, no endless loop of questions running through his mind. The betrayal had cut deep, but the wound had healed, leaving only a faint scar. He didn't hate Rachel, didn't wish her suffering, he simply didn't care anymore. That, he realized, was the true victory, not revenge, not seeing her life unravel, but reaching a place where she no longer held any power over him. A month later, he ran into her by accident. He had been leaving a coffee shop, his phone in one hand, keys in the other, when he almost collided with someone stepping onto the sidewalk. Rachel. She looked different. The polished, put-together facade was still there, the designer handbag, the carefully applied makeup, but there was something else beneath it. A tiredness, a strain around her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Michael!" Her voice was softer than he remembered. He gave a curt nod, stepping aside to let her pass. She hesitated. "Can we talk?" He considered it for a moment, then shook his head. "I don't think there's anything left to say." Rachel swallowed, glancing away. I wanted to say I'm sorry." Michael met her gaze, searching for something genuine in her expression. Maybe she meant it, maybe she didn't. It didn't matter. He had already moved past it. "Take care, Rachel." And with that, he walked away. He didn't look back.